everybody, it's Emily at Arc Schooling, and today I want to recommend you some dystopian books. I've been trying to do a book recommendations video at least once a month, and I'm focusing on giving you guys recommendations that go along with the prompts for the Build Your Library Reading Challenge. So I asked my channel members what they wanted me to do. I gave them two options and they voted for dystopian. So that is what we're going to do today. So first up, I want to talk a bit about what dystopian means, because when I was doing some research for this video, a lot of the lists I was looking at, I was like, that's not dystopian. Like, what's happening? So dystopian literature is a genre of literature that depicts like a society in decline, and it's usually through an oppressive government, and frequently will have like a character, a cast of characters who are working to overthrow that. Not always, but usually. And so I kept finding like apocalypse stories or like pandemic stories, which I don't think are the same thing. So I'm going to share some books with you right now that I think are worth picking up that are dystopian. So first up, I want to recommend Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Bayron. This is a dystopian because it does in fact have an oppressive government system and you have a character who is working to overthrow it. So this follows a girl named Sophie, and she lives in a kingdom that is run by the prince. The story of Cinderella really happened, and the Prince Charming is the one ruling this kingdom, and he has very strict rules about how women are allowed to behave and what is expected of them. So like they have to attend a ball, and if they are not chosen, then they are severely punished. And the girls are all told the story of Cinderella. Like if they're very good, if they behave, if they do everything right, then there's a chance that the fairy godmother might come and help them. There's a chance that they will meet a prince who will take care of them and love them for all of their days. But the reality is that they are probably either not going to get chosen at all, or if they do, it's going to be some random man who is not going to treat them well. There's a lot in here about women being abused, women disappearing. Like, if you're not chosen by the time you're 16, you're a spinster. Like, there's a lot going on in here. And we meet our main character, Sophia, who is not interested in any of this. She doesn't like men. She's more attracted to girls. And she doesn't want to be a part of this system anymore. And so the story is about her coming to terms with all of this and figuring out how to save not just herself, but everybody from this system. So definitely recommend it. I thought this was excellent. I want to recommend Feed by M.T. Anderson. This one's very different, and a lot of people might be turned off by the writing style because the dialogue and stuff in here is a challenge, I think, to read, especially if you're not prepared for it. So I'm preparing you. The writing style in this is quite different because we are following characters who live in a future in which we are all implanted with a chip that gives us access to the internet, basically, in our brain. So we are constantly being bombarded with ads, and they're always just selling you things. So think like Instagram, TikTok, all that in your head all the time. And so it's a very consumeristic world where everything is about like the algorithm. And if you don't fit the algorithm, then you are broken, and that they must do something about that. So you're following a guy who meets this girl on the moon, and she's not fitting into the system the way everyone else is. And he finds her really intriguing and decides to befriend her. And I don't want to tell you more than that because I think that's all you really need to know to go into this. But I think this is a really interesting story about consumer culture and how we are being constantly fed information and advertising and this desire to buy everything. Like, this is a really interesting one to hand to your teens, but I would recommend it for adults too. I want to recommend Snow Globe by So Young Park. I read this last year, and I thought it was really interesting. I think there's a sequel out now that I have not gotten my hands on yet. But this is a Korean story. It's translated. Basically, the world is very cold now. Climate change has kind of ruined the planet, and everyone lives in these frigid wasteland towns. And if you're very lucky, you get chosen to live in the globe, which is like this part of the country that is under a dome, and so they have climate control, and there's like a reality TV aspect to this, and if you live in the dome, you are in this reality TV program, and they just follow you around and try to like put you in the show. And it's kind of hard to explain the story because it's so very different from anything I think I've read. But basically, you're following a character who gets the opportunity to go live in the globe and finding out that it isn't the paradise that she thought it would be, and figuring out how to escape. So definitely worth picking up because it is so different. I think it's neat to read translated stories and just get a different perspective on like what dystopian could look like. Another translated work, I gotta recommend Battle Royale. This is by Ko-Shung Takami, and I actually saw the movie before I read the book, and then wanted to read the book because the movie was a little bit confusing. I think some of the translation and the subtitles didn't make a lot of sense to me, so I read the book. Really liked this so much more. This is basically similar to the Hunger Games in that it's about an oppressive government regime in Japan where one class of teens is selected every year to participate in Battle Royale, where they all are tasked with killing each other, and the survivor wins. If you survive, I think they give you money and fame and that sort of thing. But like the Hunger Games, the winner isn't really winning anything. It's so much worse than the Hunger Games as far as gore and that sort of thing goes. So if you're not sure you can handle gore, this might not be for you. But the writing is really well done. I found this fascinating, like getting like the background on why it's happening. If you've seen the movie, this goes so much more in depth as to how this came to be, why it's happening. Each of the characters gets a lot more of a deeper dive than they do in the movie. It is long, but it reads very fast. Like this, the pace of this is just as fast as you would expect it to be in a story like this. So definitely recommend it. I want to recommend Future Home of the Living God by Louise Erdrich. We read this with book club last year, and I thought the premise of this was really, really interesting. I still think I want more from it, but it is worth picking up. And this is from an Indigenous Native American perspective, and we're following a character who is pregnant. And in this, the start of the story, we're finding out that evolution is going backwards. We're devolving, and they want to find out why that's happening. So they start like finding pregnant women and bringing them in and like keeping them under surveillance so they can see what happens to their babies when they're born and find out like why this is happening. But it's done in a way that it is against their will. So all these women are being like rounded up, and she is trying to prevent that from happening to her. And I thought that the ideas in this book were so interesting. There are so many things going on, but it isn't focused as much as I would have liked on those things that are happening around our main character. But it was still so interesting. The idea of humans devolving and what does that mean? And like not just humans, animals too. Like there's like saber-toothed tigers in this book and stuff like that. So like it was a really cool concept. I just wish that it had been better fleshed out. But like I still think this is absolutely worth picking up. I cannot talk about dystopian literature and not bring up Scythe. I'm sorry. I was going to try not to include this in the video, but I was like, but I have to. But I have to. So this is a trilogy by Neil Shusterman that I would say starts out utopian and then becomes dystopian over the course of the trilogy. And I think that makes it unique in that you start out in this perfect world where we have conquered death. There is no more illness. People don't die anymore. We have everything we could ever need. No one's poor. No one's sad. Everyone lives a good life. But what does it mean to be immortal? What happens to humanity when they are immortal? And like, people can reset themselves constantly. So like, you don't have to even get old. You don't have to age, because you can just keep resetting yourself to your preferred age of like 25 or something. You can just continuously live and start new families and carry on over and over again. And the world is now run not by governments of men, but by the sentient cloud, the Thunderhead. And the Thunderhead is perfectly unbiased and can just make sure everyone has what they need without worrying about wanting more power or any of that kind of thing. But to keep the population under control, we require a group of people called Scythes who are tasked with gleaning the population. And they are state-sanctioned murderers. And what happens when you separate people from the Thunderhead and give them their own power structure? What happens when you give them the ability to kill freely? What does that do to people? And how does that cause problems for the world? That's what this is about. And like, how can you be a killer professionally without becoming evil? This book is fascinating. Like, the whole trilogy, I think, is amazing. It's one of the best pieces of dystopian literature I think I've ever read. It does so much in a trilogy and talks about so many different things. I could literally talk to you about this for days. I'm not going to do that here. We're going to keep this succinct, but like, I cannot do a video about this without recommending that you check out Arc of the Scythe if you have not read this yet. Another somewhat different take on dystopian lit, I want to talk about Stephen King's book, The Long Walk. This is very different because you'll never really know what's actually happening here. This does not go into anything to do with the government. This focuses on this event that they have each year where a group of boys go on a walk. It sounds boring. Like, the whole book is them walking, but there are rules and you can't go below a certain speed. You can't ever stop. You just have to keep going and maintain the same speed or faster, I guess, until the end of the race. And the race ends when there is only one person left, basically. And why are they doing this? People are watching them. It's like a parade coming through town. And it's seen as this like important thing that you get to do. And most of the boys are there willingly and they're excited to participate in this. But it's so strange. Like, why are they doing this? And so there's a lot of questions that aren't answered in this, which if you're a person that needs answers, like I am, that might bother you at first. But the more I sat with this and the more I thought about it, the more I started to like it. I think it's a really interesting story. I think it's getting adapted too. I feel like I remember hearing that. So I'm very curious to see how they do that in a movie, because on the surface, it's kind of like how, you know, Gerald's Game is just about a woman trapped on a bed. Like, this is a story about a bunch of boys taking a walk. Like, it's not super interesting outside of them getting shot at for slowing down, but there's a lot to talk about and think about in this one. I want to recommend The Parable of the Sower and The Parable of the Talents. I've talked extensively about this series. I love them. They're so interesting. So this is by Octavia Butler. It's set now, essentially. I think the first book starts in 2024 or 2025 and goes through the 2030s. What I think is great about this is that it shows how humanity can overcome fascism and how we can overcome a dystopian world through belief, through love, through empathy. that is what I think this does different than other things. This focuses so much more on empathy and how that can be both a burden and a strength. We're following our main character, Lauren, who at the beginning of the series is living with her family in this compound. Her father is a preacher, and so she's raised Christian, and over the course of the story, she's developing this new religion that she calls Earthseed. And so like every chapter starts with a passage that she's written about her religion, Earthseed. And so that, I think, is what also I love about it, is because you're reading about the founding of a religion, which I always find fascinating. But it's also a really interesting religion that she's building and creating, and she's gaining followers along the way on this journey that she's on. And so that's what this book is about. In the second book, it's more told through different perspectives. Like we're following her daughter in this one, and her daughter's never met her. She was taken when she was young and given to another family, and she's heard of her mother, and she's trying to find out more about her. And so the story is like her trying to understand why her mother was the way that she was and what she did and how she was able to find a way through this world that she's in. But it's also very disturbing because the things that are happening in this book are things that are happening right now. And so like you're seeing a world where the country is falling to fascism, where people are like living in this Christian nationalist state, and so much is so similar to where we are right now with the climate and all the things. It's very disturbing, so be prepared for that, but it's also very good. So those are my recommendations. I hope that I've given you something that you might want to check out and read towards the Build Your Library Reading Challenge. Also, I would love for you to leave your recommendations for your favorite dystopian literature down below, because I love dystopian lit and I always want to read more. So recommend things that you think I should pick up or that you think other people might like to read. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Happy reading. Bye.